Okay, if I put you on the spot right now, most famous story in the history of Western civilization.
Yeah.
What's your gut answer?
Oh, wow.
Not just the Bible, I mean literature in general.
I mean, you'd have to land on something like the Prodigal Son or the Good Samaritan.
I was betting you'd say that.
They're just, they're cultural furniture. Even if you've never set foot in a church, you know what a Good Samaritan is. It's written into our laws, it's in our idioms.
Exactly. We know the beats. We know the moral, or at least we think we do.
Right.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Familiarity breeds,
Blindness.
well, maybe not contempt, but certainly blindness.
Yeah.
But we stop reading because we think we've already got the T-shirt.
It's the Sunday school effect. You hear a simplified version of a story when you're 5 years old, maybe with cartoons, and you never really go back and re-examine it with an adult brain.
You just assume it means be nice or God forgives you.
Yes, sir.
Which is why I am genuinely pumped about the stack of research we have today. We are going back to the Gospel of Luke, but we are effectively stripping the paint off these old stories.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to decode them using two specific scholarly lenses that, quite frankly, change everything.
It really is a decoding. We aren't just looking at the plot. We are looking at the infrastructure of the story, the stuff that's kind of hiding in the walls, and the psychology of the characters.
So here is the mission for this deep dive. First, we're going to tackle a concept called unhiding the invisible. This comes from some fascinating work in the Ancient Jew Review.
Right.
And it claims there are people, specifically women, who are historically hidden in the text, but are actually essential to making the story physically function.
And then we're going to pivot to the second lens, eavesdropping on the soul. This is based on research from the Journal of Biblical Literature, and it's all about a literary device Luke uses called interior monologue.
Which, spoiler alert, suggests that some of the most, repentant characters in the Bible might actually just be calculating con artists.
It definitely complicates the picture. It sort of turns heroes into hustlers.
We've got sources ranging from biblical journals to theological commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal, to see what happens when we open that other eye we've had closed.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this unhiding concept first. The source material talks about this basic premise that usually when we read these ancient texts, if a woman isn't explicitly named, we assume she just isn't there.
Right. A male-only stage.
Yeah, the argument is that this is a very modern, very literal way of reading.
It is. We expect the text to give us a complete inventory, like a movie script where every extra is listed in the credits. But this approach, it ignores the social imagination of the first century audience.
Social imagination, that's a key term.
What?
Play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't that just a fancy way of saying we're going to invent characters to make the text more inclusive?
That's a fair question.
How do we know we aren't just projecting modern values backward?
And that's the skeptical question we should be asking. But the answer, it lies in historical accuracy, not modern politics. The text is androcentric. It centers on men, on fathers, sons, judges. But the world it describes, the actual agrarian economy of the first century, it relied heavily on female labor.
So the argument is that the ancient listener wouldn't need to be told a woman was there.
Exactly. They would just know. The source calls it a double imagination. We have to imagine what the original listeners imagined. When a first century listener hears about a feast, they don't just see food magically appearing on a table. They see the labor. They would automatically assume the presence of women because the scenes literally couldn't happen without them.
Okay, let's test this theory. Let's look at the heavy hitter, the prodigal son. Luke chapter 15. You've got the father, the wild younger son, the grumpy older son. It feels very dudes only.
On the surface, yes. But let's look at the infrastructure the source points out. The son comes home. The father calls for the best robe. He calls for a ring. And most importantly, he calls for the fatted calf to be killed and a feast to be prepared.
Right. So they're having a BBQ.
But think about the logistics of a feast in the first century. The fatted calf doesn't cook itself.
Right.
Who weaves and maintains the best robe? Who bakes the bread that goes with the meat? Who draws the water? That is the domain of women. The unhiding reading asks, who sustains this household?
The textually silenced women are structurally essential.
That's the phrase.
So if you remove the women from the logic of the story,
The prodigal son comes home to a naked father and a raw, bloody calf carcass on the floor.
okay, that is a visceral image. It's a horror movie, not a redemption story.
Precisely. The welcome is physically impossible without the female labor force of the household. The ancient audience knows this. They hear feast, and they see the women working. We hear feast, and we see a buffet line.
Let's apply this to another one. The friend at midnight in Luke 11. The guy bangs on his neighbor's door at midnight, asking for bread.
Again, look at the context of bread. In our world, you grab a slice from a plastic bag. In the first century, bread making was a complex, time-consuming process. Grinding grain, leavening, baking.
Almost exclusively female labor.
Yes, so if the neighbor hands over 3 loaves of bread at midnight...
It's very likely a woman baked it, or is the one being woken up to find it.
And remember, the sleeping arrangements were communal. The whole family slept together on a raised platform.
So you aren't just bothering the man of the house.
No, you are disrupting the entire domestic ecosystem. Waking the kids, the wife, the servants. Their request is much more socially expensive than we realize.
It really does change the vibe. Makes the guy seem even more desperate. What about the Good Samaritan? Luke 10. That feels like a road movie. Just 2 guys on a highway?
But where does it end? The Samaritan bandages the victim and takes him to an inn. And he pays the innkeeper. Now, we think of an inn like a Motel 6. But in the ancient world, inns were infrastructures of care.
Meaning what? Nursing.
Exactly. Wound tending, washing, feeding. The source suggests this relied heavily on female labor. The Samaritan provides the capital, the money, but he outsources the actual care.
That's a cynical, but I guess accurate way to put it. The ethical universalism relies on an infrastructure of care that involves women.
Right. So the takeaway here isn't that we are rewriting the story to add women for diversity. It's that we are recovering the mothers, the bakers, the healers, who were always there in the mind of the original listener. We're just putting them back in the frame.
I like that. It grounds the theology in dirty dishes and laundry.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears. We're going from who is hidden in the background to what is hidden inside the characters' heads.
This is where it gets really juicy. This source from the Journal of Biblical Literature, it really flips the script on how we view the morality of these people.
Because usually in the Bible, you don't get a lot of stream of consciousness, right? You just see what people do.
Exactly. In Matthew or Mark, you get third-person descriptions. He was sad. He was angry. But Luke is unique. He uses a specific literary device called interior monologue, a soliloquy. He lets the characters actually voice their inner thoughts.
They talk to themselves.
They dispute with their souls. And this matters because it's not just for dramatic effect. It reveals their true motivation, usually right in a crisis. And here's the kicker. The thoughts usually aren't very noble.
Okay, give me an example. Who are we eavesdropping on?
Take the rich fool in Luke 12. Classic story. He has a bumper crop, runs out of barn space.
Right.
And the text says he reasons within himself. He asks, "What shall I do?"
And what's the answer?
He says, "I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.'"
It's just pure narcissism.
Yes.
My barns, my crops, my soul.
It's practical, calculated greed. There's no thought of God and, crucially, no thought of his neighbor. He has extra food, and his only thought is storage, not sharing. The monologue exposes him.
It proves his guilt. If we didn't hear his thoughts, we might just think he was a prudent businessman expanding his operations.
Precisely. The monologue is the evidence. Now, look at the unjust judge in Luke 18. This is the guy who finally gives justice to the widow because she keeps bothering him.
Right, the lesson on persistence. Keep knocking.
That's the lesson for us. But look at the judge. On the outside, he does the right thing. He grants justice. But Luke lets us hear his private thought process. He says to himself, "Though I feel neither God nor man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will vindicate her, or she will wear me out."
So he's not doing it because he cares about justice. He's doing it because she's annoying him.
He explicitly admits he has no fear of God. The monologue prevents us from making him a hero. He helps the widow purely to avoid being worn down, which, by the way, the source notes is a boxing term in the Greek.
Wait, really? Like to give a black eye?
Exactly. He's afraid she's going to metaphorically punch him in the face. Or maybe just damage his reputation. But the motive is purely selfish.
Okay, that brings us back to the prodigal son. And this is where that Journal of Biblical Literature source just dropped a bomb on me.
I know.
Because I have always cried at this story. The son hits rock bottom, realizes he was wrong, goes home. It's the ultimate repentance story.
That is the traditional reading, but the source asks us to look at the interior monologue again. The text says he came to himself. Now, we interpret that as a spiritual awakening.
I've seen the light.
But the source argues it's more of a realization of his physical state. He's starving, he's looking at the pigs, eating better than he is.
Okay.
And then he starts scripting a speech. In his head, he rehearses. "I will say to my father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you.'"
Wait, You're saying the speech is a strategy? Like he's prepping for a job interview?
Some scholars argue, yes, it's a survival strategy.
Right.
The monologue shows him calculating. He isn't necessarily thinking, I love my dad. He's thinking, my dad's hired servants have bread. If I say this specific speech, maybe I can get a job and not starve.
That is, wow, that's incredibly cynical. You're saying his return is induced by his stomach, not his heart.
The source puts it exactly that way. He is manipulating the patriarchy to get fed. He's running a game.
But doesn't that ruin the story? If he's just scamming his dad, where's the beauty?
Actually, I think it makes the father's reaction even more powerful.
How so?
Because the father interrupts him. The son starts his rehearsed, manipulative speech, and the father doesn't even let him finish the make me a servant part before hugging him and calling for the robe.
So the father ignores the manipulation and gives him grace anyway.
Exactly. If the son is genuinely sorry, it's a nice story. But if the son is a scoundrel trying to scam a meal and the father still restores him, that is radical, unmerited grace. The monologue highlights just how unworthy the son actually is.
Wow. Okay, I see that. It actually raises the stakes, turns it from a story about a good kid who made a mistake into a story about a bad kid who gets loved anyway.
And that fits the pattern in Luke. Look at the shrewd manager, he's about to be fired. Asks himself, what shall I do? He admits, I am too weak to dig and ashamed to beg.
Very honest, at least. He knows his limits.
Very. So his solution, reducing the debts of his master's debtors, isn't charity. It's a survival strategy. He's buying friends with his master's money so he has a place to crash when he gets fired.
So summarizing this segment, these characters are not heroes.
No. They are ordinary, often desperate people plotting their way out of trouble, and Luke uses the private soul device to show us that desperation. He exposes the hustle.
That transitions us perfectly to our next theme, status and reversal. Because if these guys are plotting to save their own skins, there are other stories where your status gets completely flipped in the next life.
Right. The great reversal theme. We're looking at the rich man and Lazarus, and the Pharisee and the tax collector.
Let's start with the rich man and Lazarus. This is the one that terrified me as a kid.
It is terrifying. It's the ultimate reversal. And the source we looked at points out the extreme hyperbole here.
It's not subtle.
No. The rich man isn't just rich, he wears purple. Purple dye came from sea snails. It was the color of royalty. This guy is the 1% of the 1%.
And Lazarus isn't just poor.
No, he's covered in sores. The dogs lick him. And in the Jewish mindset, dogs were unclean scavengers. So Lazarus is ritually unclean, physically in agony and starving.
But then death happens, and boom, instant reversal. Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom, and the rich man is in torment. Now, I know there's a debate here. Is this a literal map of the afterlife?
That is the big question. The source notes that debate. Some read it literally fire, chasm, Abraham. But others say this fits the pattern of a parable. It's using standard Jewish imagery to make a point about justice.
It's almost a political cartoon. The rich guy is still trying to order Lazarus around in hell. Send Lazarus to bring me water.
Exactly. He still thinks Lazarus is a servant. He hasn't learned a thing. And the warning at the end is chilling. He wants to send Lazarus back to warn his brothers. He wants to perform necromancy.
But Abraham says no.
He says, they have Moses and the prophets. Basically, they have the Bible. If they won't listen to scripture about caring for the poor, they won't listen even if someone rises from the dead.
Which is heavy foreshadowing of Jesus' own resurrection.
Exactly. But let's look at the Pharisee and the tax collector. This connects back to our interior monologue theme.
Two men go up to pray, one super religious, one a social outcast.
And the source we have highlights something fascinating about the Pharisee's prayer. It says he stood and prayed to himself.
There it is again, the soliloquy.
It links back. His prayer is entirely horizontal. He's comparing himself to others. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, or even this tax collector.
He's defining his righteousness by who he isn't. But surely he's doing good stuff.
Oh yeah, he lists his resume. I fast twice a week. And the source notes that, according to early church documents, pious Jews did fast on Mondays and Thursdays. So he's not lying. He is the model church member.
And then look at the tax collector.
His prayer is short. Only 6 words in the Greek. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He stands far off, won't look up. His focus is vertical. Just him and God.
And the punchline.
The word justified. This is a legal term. The tax collector went home justified, acquitted, declared righteous, while the Pharisee did not.
Wow. The guy who did everything right on paper, the tithing, the fasting, didn't get the stamp of approval. The guy who was a traitor to his people did.
It's the great reversal. Status means nothing. Attitude means everything. The insider is out and the outsider is in.
So zooming out, what does this all mean? Why did Jesus tell stories this way? We've got hidden women, selfish monologues, social reversals. Why so complex? Why not just say, be nice and love God?
Well, according to our sources, it's actually about making it simple, but deceptively so.
Relatability.
Right, Jesus used everyday imagery, leaven, lost coins, baking bread, sheep, because he knew what was in man. He used the lived realities of his audience. He talked about debt, hunger, difficult neighbors.
But there's a paradox, isn't there? Because the disciples are always asking, why do you speak in parables? They didn't always get it.
There is a paradox. To the insiders, those willing to dig, like we are today, these stories reveal the secrets of the kingdom. But to the outsiders, those who aren't willing to look deeper, they can just seem like simple riddles.
They conceal as much as they reveal.
They act as internal analogies, nature witnessing to the spiritual world. But you have to be willing to look. If you read The Prodigal Son and just see a nice dad, you miss the desperate, calculating son and the radical, unmerited grace.
And if you read The Good Samaritan and miss the innkeeper.
You miss the community effort required for justice. You miss the fact that being a good Samaritan involves your wallet and an infrastructure of care, not just a moment of kindness.
We've really peeled back some layers today.
Yeah.
We found the women working in the background in the social imagination, the ones cooking that fatted calf.
We heard the selfish, desperate thoughts of the rich fool and the shrewd manager through that interior monologue device. We saw that they aren't moral heroes, but desperate humans.
And we saw the social reversal of the rich man and Lazarus. The guy in purple ends up with nothing, and the guy with the dogs ends up in the seat of honor. It's like these stories are alive. They shift when you change the angle.
And that leads us to a final thought from the Ancient Jew Review source. They suggest that this unhiding reading isn't just a literary trick, it's an ethical tool.
How so?
Well, if we can train ourselves to see the invisible women in the text, the ones who are essential but ignored, does that train us to see the invisible or marginalized people in our own communities today?
That is a powerful question. Are we reading the world with one eye closed, too?
It raises a challenge for you, the listener. Who is sustaining the infrastructure of your life or your community that you just haven't noticed? Who is baking the bread at midnight while you sleep?
Something to think about next time you read these simple stories. They might just be the most complex things you ever read. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Go read Luke again and see who and what thoughts you can find hiding in plain sight.
See you next time.